The acidic rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of Elias's workshop, creating a cacophony that had become the soundtrack of his evenings in Neo-Viridian. He found comfort in the noise. It drowned out the thoughts that plagued him when silence took hold. The workshop, a collection of salvaged machinery and tools accumulated over years of solitary existence, was his sanctuary from the industrial wasteland that the city had become. Elias wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag that had once been white, but now bore the permanent marks of engine oil and chemical residue. His day's work was done. Fixing the neighborhood's broken appliances, jury-rigging solutions to problems caused by the city's ever-declining infrastructure. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept him fed and housed in this forgotten corner of Neo-Viridian, far from the gleaming skyscrapers and artificial gardens of the city center where the privileged few lived above the smog line. Through the smudged window, he could see the distant towers, their upper levels illuminated by clean electric light, while the lower portions disappeared into the yellowish haze that perpetually hung over the city. The disparity never failed to remind him of his place in the world, someone who existed in the shadows of progress, picking up the scraps that fell from the table of the elite. The memories threatened to surface again. His family's faces, the industrial accident that had taken them 5 years ago, the corporate cover-up that followed, leaving him with nothing but scars and bitterness. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on securing the workshop for the night. The rain was especially caustic tonight. The atmospheric purifiers must be malfunctioning again. Anyone caught outside would suffer chemical burns within minutes. As he moved to shut the heavy metal door, a sound caught his attention, something metallic falling over near the recycling bins at the side of his workshop. Probably a stray cat, he thought, though those had become rare in recent years as the pollution took its toll on the city's wildlife. Curiosity overrode his usual caution. Grabbing an umbrella coated with acid-resistant polymer, a luxury he had bartered months of repair work for, Elias stepped outside, the rain hissing as droplets hit the ground around his boots. "Hello," he called, moving toward the bins, his voice nearly lost in the downpour. The sight that greeted him froze him in place. Huddled against the wall, partially shielded by an overhanging piece of scrap metal, was a figure unlike any he had ever seen. Human in shape, but undeniably alien. Its skin had a pale metallic sheen that seemed to ripple under the harsh light of his workshop's exterior lamp. What struck him most were the eyes, large, amber-colored orbs that reflected light like a cat's, but held an unmistakable intelligence and fear. Most remarkable were the faint, luminescent patterns that appeared on its skin where the rain had touched, creating swirling designs that pulsed with a soft blue glow. The creature was clearly female in form, though Elias knew better than to make assumptions based on human standards. She wore what appeared to be tattered remains of some form-fitting garment, now ripped and soiled. Her limbs were thin, whether from her natural physiology or from hunger, he couldn't tell. A small cut on her arm oozed a substance that was not quite blood, more viscous and with an iridescent quality. When she saw Elias, she pressed herself further against the wall, making a sound somewhere between a whimper and a musical note. The sound stirred something in him, a long-dormant protectiveness he thought had died with his family. His mind raced with the implications of what he was seeing. An extraterrestrial being here in Neo-Viridian's industrial zone. The authorities would pay handsomely for such a discovery. Or worse, the research divisions of the corporations that ran the city would conduct experiments that he didn't want to imagine. The smart move would be to walk away, pretend he saw nothing. Self-preservation had become his mantra in the years since the accident. Yet as he watched her shiver, saw the acidic rain leaving faint red marks on her exposed skin, something shifted inside him. The fear in those amber eyes was universal, transcending species and worlds. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. He extended the umbrella toward her, then pointed upward at the falling rain, trying to communicate that he was offering protection. The alien hesitated, her gaze darting between Elias's face and the umbrella. Another droplet of rain hit her shoulder, and she flinched as it left a mark. Making a decision, Elias stepped closer and held the umbrella over both of them. "Come inside," he said, gesturing toward the workshop door. "It's safe there." After a moment of apparent deliberation, she nodded, a surprisingly human gesture that took Elias aback. She attempted to stand but stumbled, weak from what must have been days of exposure and hunger. Without thinking, Elias offered his arm for support. She tensed at his touch, but accepted his help, her skin surprisingly warm against his. As they made their slow way to the workshop door, Elias glanced nervously at the street cameras mounted at the corner. They were supposed to be for public safety, but everyone knew they fed directly to corporate security. He positioned himself to block their view of his strange companion as best he could. Once inside, he quickly shut and locked the door, drawing the blackout curtains across the windows. The alien stood awkwardly in the center of the room, taking in the cluttered space with obvious curiosity despite her distress. "Sit," Elias said, pointing to his worn couch that served as both sitting area and bed on the nights when he worked too late to climb the stairs to his small apartment above the shop. She understood the gesture and perched on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid with tension. In the better light of the workshop, Elias could see more details of her appearance. The patterns on her skin had faded now that she was out of the rain, but faint traces remained, like circuitry just beneath the surface. Her hair, if it could be called that, was more like fine, silvery filaments that moved subtly even in the still air of the room. "You need to dry off," Elias muttered, more to himself than to her. He rummaged through a cabinet and found a clean towel, a real one, not the synthetic paper most people use now. It was one of the few possessions he'd saved from his old life. He approached slowly, holding out the towel. She took it after a moment's hesitation, examining the fabric with slender fingers that had an extra joint compared to human hands. She seemed unsure of its purpose until Elias mimed rubbing it against his arm. Understanding dawned in her eyes, and she began to carefully dry herself, paying special attention to the areas where the rain had caused irritation. While she was occupied, Elias moved to his small kitchenette and opened the refrigerator. His supplies were meager: a half-eaten container of synthetic protein soup, some stale bread, a few nutrient capsules that were standard rations in the outer districts. He heated the soup in an ancient microwave that he'd repaired so many times that barely any original parts remained. When he returned with the steaming bowl and bread, the alien had finished drying herself and was examining a circuit board that had been lying on the table beside the couch. "Here," he said, setting the food down beside her. "You should eat something." She looked at the offering, then back at Elias. Slowly, she reached for the spoon, copying the way Elias pantomimed eating. Her first taste was tentative, but her eyes widened, and she began to eat with increasing enthusiasm. Elias couldn't help but smile. Hunger, it seemed, was also universal. While she ate, Elias found an old set of clothes, a soft t-shirt and sweatpants with a drawstring that could be tightened to fit her slender frame. He set them beside her and turned away, busying himself with organizing tools to give her privacy. When he glanced back, she had changed and was now swimming in his oversized clothes, the sleeves rolled up several times to free her hands. "We need to figure out how to communicate," Elias said, knowing she couldn't understand but feeling the need to break the silence. He found an old tablet, technology considered obsolete by Neo-Viridian standards but still functional thanks to his tinkering. He opened a drawing application and sketched a simple stick figure, then pointed to himself. "Elias," he said clearly, tapping his chest. She watched intently, then took the tablet. With surprising dexterity, she drew another figure with the unmistakable patterns of her skin. She pointed to herself and made a sound that Elias could only approximate as Lyra. "Lyra," he repeated, testing the name. She nodded enthusiastically, and for the first time, her mouth curved into what was recognizably a smile. The tension in the room eased slightly. Over the next few hours, they developed a rudimentary means of communication through drawings and gestures. Lyra proved to be incredibly intelligent, quickly grasping the basic concepts Elias tried to convey and retaining every word he taught her. By midnight, She could say water, food, thank you, and danger, the last one accompanied by a drawing of what looked like uniformed figures. Elias understood from her crew drawings that she had been part of a crew on some kind of vessel that had encountered problems. She had been separated during what he guessed was an emergency landing or crash. Her people were looking for her, but she couldn't contact them. The fear in her eyes when she drew figures resembling local authorities made it clear she knew the danger of being discovered. As the night deepened, Elias made up a sleeping area for her on the couch, using his spare blankets and pillow. He would take the floor tonight. As he was arranging the makeshift bed, the light above them flickered and went out, a common occurrence in the outer districts where power was unreliable at best. He sighed. Reaching for the emergency lantern he kept charged for such occasions. Before he could find it, however, a soft glow illuminated the room. Lyra had raised her hand, and the patterns on her skin were glowing again, providing enough light to see by. She gave him a shy look, as if uncertain whether this display of her abilities would frighten him. Instead, Elias found himself fascinated. "That's incredible," he said softly. She didn't understand the words, but his tone and expression must have conveyed his meaning. She smiled again, the light from her skin reflecting in her amber eyes. As Elias lay on his makeshift bed on the floor that night, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of his unexpected guest, he realized that for the first time in years, the workshop didn't feel empty. The weight of solitude that had become his constant companion had lifted, if only temporarily. What had he gotten himself into? Harboring an alien fugitive was surely a crime that would land him in a corporate labor camp, or worse. Yet as he drifted towards sleep, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. In this city of steel and smog, where humanity had forgotten its humanity, perhaps it took someone from beyond the stars to remind him of his own. The next morning, Elias woke to find Lyra examining his workbench with intense interest. She had arranged his tools in neat rows, sorted by size and function, with an intuitive understanding that surprised him. When she noticed he was awake, she pointed excitedly to a broken plasma cutter that had been sitting in his to-fix-eventually pile for months. "That's broken," he explained, making a snapping motion with his hands. "I don't have the parts to fix it." Lyra shook her head and gestured for him to watch. She placed her hands on either side of the device, and the patterns on her skin began to glow faintly. After a moment of concentration, she pressed a specific spot on the cutter's circuit housing. To Elias's astonishment, the power indicator light blinked on, and the tool hummed to life. "How did you?" he began, taking the cutter from her with wide eyes. She tapped her temple and then pointed to the tool, trying to convey something. Elias understood that somehow she could sense the electrical pathways, perhaps even manipulate them. It was both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Over the next few days, they fell into a cautious routine. Elias would work on his repairs during the day, occasionally locking Lyra in the apartment upstairs when customers came by. She spent the time learning more words from an old language program he'd installed on the tablet, making remarkable progress. In the evenings, they would share meals, and Elias would teach her about Earth and Neo-Viridian, while she would try to explain her world through drawings and the growing vocabulary they shared. He learned that her planet was called something that sounded like Lemuria to his ears, and that her people, the Lemurians, were explorers who studied other civilizations. Her particular team had been observing Earth from orbit when a malfunction forced them to descend too close to the atmosphere. During the emergency procedures, Lyra had become separated from the others and had been stranded for nearly 2 weeks before Elias found her. The patterns on her skin, she explained through gestures and drawings, were not just decorative but functional, a bioluminescent adaptation that allowed her people to communicate over distances and interface with their technology. In her world, technology and biology had evolved in harmony rather than as separate domains. As the days passed, Lyra's presence in the workshop brought unexpected changes. The chronically malfunctioning lights stopped flickering. Appliances that Elias had given up on suddenly worked perfectly. More significantly, the ever-present emptiness that had haunted the space since his family's death began to recede. He found himself sharing stories about his past. His childhood in what used to be called the Midwest before geographical restructuring, his parents who had been engineers, his sister who had dreamed of becoming a botanical researcher. He showed Lyra the only photograph he had saved, a family portrait taken at the Grand Canyon, one of the few natural wonders that had been preserved as a corporate tourist destination. Lyra listened with a focus that made Elias feel truly heard for the first time in years. When he showed her the scar that ran from his wrist to elbow, a reminder of the industrial accident, she placed her hand over it gently. Her skin glowed softly where it touched his, and though it didn't heal the old wound, the gesture itself felt healing in a way he couldn't articulate. But their fragile peace couldn't last forever in a city built on surveillance and suspicion. The first sign of trouble came from Elias's landlady, Mrs. Patel, an elderly woman who supplemented her meager corporate pension by managing several rundown properties in the district. "Elias, dear," she said one morning when he went to deliver his rent payment, "is everything all right at the shop? The neighborhood watch reported some unusual lights coming from your windows late at night. Not that I'm spying, you understand, but corporate security has been asking questions, and I thought I should warn you." "Just working late, Mrs. Patel," Elias replied with what he hoped was a casual shrug. "Been experimenting with some new repair techniques using UV light. Sorry if it disturbed anyone." She didn't seem entirely convinced, but nodded nonetheless. "Just be careful. You know how they are about unauthorized power usage these days. And there have been rumors of unregistered persons in the district. They've increased the reward for reporting illegals, you know." The warning set Elias on edge. That evening, he reinforced the blackout curtains and showed Lyra how to be more careful about using her bioluminescent abilities near windows. But the incident also made him realize that Lyra needed supplies he couldn't scavenge from his existing inventory. Medical supplies suited to her physiology, which differed from human needs in subtle but important ways. The acidic rain had left marks on her skin that weren't healing properly with standard antiseptics. She needed a specialized calcium-rich diet that his basic rations couldn't provide. And most concerning, she had shown him a small device, a fragment from her ship's communication array, that needed specific components if there was any hope of contacting her crew. These necessities forced Elias to venture more frequently into the markets of Neo-Viridian, drawing attention as he asked discreet questions about exotic materials and compounds. He traded valuable parts from his inventory for the supplies, depleting his reserves and raising eyebrows among his usual contacts. "What's with the shopping spree, Eli?" asked Miko, a black market tech dealer who operated from a hidden stall in the underground market. "These aren't your usual requests. Calcium supplements? Specialized anti-radiation cream? Someone would think you're planning a trip to the exclusion zone." "Just a special project," Elias replied evasively, sliding across a rare pre-collapse circuit board as payment. Miko whistled at the offering. "Must be some project. Hope it's worth it." "It is," Elias said simply, gathering his purchases and leaving before more questions could follow. Unknown to him, a security drone had been hovering nearby, its facial recognition software logging the transaction for routine corporate monitoring. In a city where resources were tightly controlled, unusual purchasing patterns were flagged automatically. Elias's file, dormant for years, received its first activity marker since the settlement of his family's accident case. Meanwhile, Lyra's grasp of language improved dramatically. Within 2 weeks, she could form basic sentences and understand much of what Elias said. Her pronunciation was still musical and strange, with certain sounds impossible for her vocal structure, but they could have real conversations now. "Your world, Neo-Viridian, why so much?" She searched for the word, gesturing at the perpetually smog-filled sky visible through a small gap in the curtains. "Dirty? Broken?" Elias sat beside her on the couch, where they often spent evenings talking. "Greed," he said simply. "The corporations that run the city care about profit, not people. They extract resources, pollute the environment, and keep people dependent on them for basic needs. Not all humans like this." "No," Elias smiled sadly. "But the ones who aren't don't usually end up with much power." Lyra considered this. "On Lemuria, We learn balance first. Technology serves life, not opposite. That sounds like a better way, Elias admitted. Here, most people are just trying to survive. Like those kids you saw yesterday. He was referring to a group of street children who had been peeking through the workshop windows. Lyra had hidden quickly, but not before noticing their thin faces and tattered clothes. They have no home, she had asked afterward. The lower districts are full of orphans and abandoned kids. The corporations don't waste resources on non-productive citizens, he explained bitterly. The conversation had fallen silent then, but later that night, Elias had found Lyra using the tablet to design what looked like a small device. When he asked about it, she had only said it was for helping, her expression determined. The next day, while Elias was meeting with a client outside the shop, Lyra completed her project, a small, solar-powered water purifier that could remove industrial contaminants from rainwater. She left it anonymously near where the street children gathered, watching from a hidden corner as they discovered it with wonder. Their excited voices as they realized what it did brought a smile to her face that lasted all day. When Elias learned what she had done, he was both touched and alarmed. That was kind, he said, but dangerous. If someone traces that technology back to us. I made it look human-made, Lyra assured him. Used only your tools, your materials. No Lemurian patterns. She hesitated, then added, could not watch children thirst. Could help, so helped. Her simple explanation struck Elias deeply. In his years of grief and isolation, he had forgotten what it meant to extend himself for others. Lyra, a stranger to this planet, had reminded him of a fundamental truth he had once known. That night, their conversation shifted to more personal territories. Lyra's improved language skills allowed her to express more complex thoughts and questions. "You're not afraid of me," she stated as they shared a meal of synthetic protein enhanced with the calcium supplements Elias had procured. "First night, you helped not capture." "Why?" Elias considered the question. "I've seen what happens to those who are different in this city. The corporations would have treated you as a specimen, not a person. I couldn't be part of that. But risk to you? Great risk." "Yes," he acknowledged. "But sometimes you have to remember who you want to be, not just what's safe." Lyra reached across the table then, her slender fingers with their extra joint gently touching the back of his hand. The contact sent a warm sensation up his arm, a pleasant tingling that seemed to resonate with something deep inside him. "I am grateful," she said simply, her amber eyes reflecting the dim light of the workshop. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of a connection that transcended their different origins, biologies, and experiences. Elias felt a flutter in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years, a mixture of fear and hope that left him momentarily speechless. The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the workshop door. Elias tensed, gesturing for Lyra to hide in the apartment upstairs. Once she was safely out of sight, he approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, he saw a district security officer in the distinctive gray uniform of corporate enforcement. His heart raced as he opened the door, just enough to be polite, but not enough to allow a clear view inside. "Can I help you, officer?" he asked, hoping his voice didn't betray his anxiety. The woman's face was impassive, her eyes hidden behind regulation augmented reality glasses that were undoubtedly scanning him and the visible portion of his workshop. "Elias Mercer? I'm Officer Diaz with District Security. We've noticed some unusual power fluctuations from this address over the past 2 weeks. Additionally, your purchasing patterns have triggered a resource allocation review. I've been working on some specialized projects," Elias explained, the half-truth coming easily. "Experimental repairs that require testing outside standard hours." Officer Diaz's expression didn't change. "Do you have the appropriate permits for such experimentation?" Neo-Viridian Municipal Code Section 457 requires registration for any power usage exceeding residential allocations by more than 15% for 3 consecutive days. "I wasn't aware," Elias lied. "I'll file the paperwork tomorrow." "See that you do." She made a note on her datapad. "Also, there have been reports of an unregistered individual in this area. All citizens are required to have valid identification and residence permits. You haven't encountered anyone suspicious, have you? Elias forced himself to maintain eye contact despite the pounding of his heart. No, officer. Just the usual customers and suppliers. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. Very well. I'll be conducting follow-up inspections in this district. Expect another visit within the week to verify your permit compliance. As she turned to leave, she added almost casually, interesting technology was found nearby yesterday. A water purifier of unusual design. The engineering division is quite interested in determining its origin. Before Elias could respond, she was walking away, her posture rigid and purposeful. He closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Lyra emerged from her hiding place, her expression troubled. They suspect, she said, not a question, but a statement. Yes, Elias admitted. We need to be more careful. But both knew that careful might not be enough anymore. The net was beginning to tighten around them, and time was running out. That night, as Lyra slept on the couch, Elias sat at his workbench examining the fragment from her ship's communication array. It was unlike any technology he had ever encountered, a smooth, slightly translucent material that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of view. Tiny, intricate patterns were etched into its surface, reminiscent of the markings on Lyra's skin. He had been trying to help her determine if it could be repaired or adapted to Earth technology, but so far, they had made little progress. The components seemed to respond slightly to Lyra's touch, the patterns momentarily brightening, but without the rest of the array, it was like having a single gear from a complex machine. As he turned it over in his hands, a sudden thought struck him. What if Lyra did manage to contact her people? Would she leave? The idea sent an unexpected pang through his chest. In just 2 short weeks, her presence had transformed his solitary existence, bringing a warmth and purpose he had forgotten could exist. Elias set the component down, troubled by his own selfish thoughts. Of course, she would want to return her own kind, her own world. He had no right to hope otherwise, no matter what unspoken thing was growing between them. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Elias reduced his client meetings to a minimum and carefully rationed their power usage to avoid further fluctuations that might attract attention. Lyra spent most of her time in the apartment upstairs, emerging only when they were certain no one was watching the building. Despite these precautions, Elias could sense they were living on borrowed time. The suspected surveillance drone sightings had increased in their neighborhood, and Mrs. Patel had warned him that corporate security was conducting more frequent identity checks throughout the district. Their fears materialized into reality one rainy evening when Elias returned from an essential supply run to find the workshop door ajar, the lock clearly forced. Hard in his throat, he rushed inside, calling Lyra's name in a harsh whisper. The workshop was in disarray, tools scattered, drawers pulled open. Worst of all, the hiding place where they had kept the ship component was empty. Panic rising, Elias bounded up the stairs to the apartment, praying he wouldn't find what he feared most. To his immense relief, Lyra was there, crouched in the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards that he had shown her for emergencies. When he helped her out, she was trembling, her normally luminescent skin dull with fear. "Corporate men," she whispered, her voice catching. 3. They search, take component. A hide in time. Elias pulled her into an embrace without thinking, his arms tightening around her slender frame as if he could protect her from the entire world. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. She shook her head against his shoulder. "Not find me, but they know. They say your name, say alien technology, say return tomorrow with specialist." The implications were clear. They had hours, at most, before a thorough search would reveal Lyra's existence. The stolen component was likely already being analyzed in a corporate lab, its alien origin confirming their suspicions. "We have to leave," Elias said, pulling back to look into her amber eyes. "Now, tonight." Lyra nodded, her expression resolute despite her fear. "Where go?" Elias's mind raced through their limited options. The outer districts were a maze of industrial zones and abandoned sectors, some so polluted or structurally unstable that even corporate security avoided them. It would be dangerous, but they might find temporary refuge in what locals called the dead zone, a former manufacturing area rendered uninhabitable by a chemical spill decades ago. "I know a place," he said, already moving to gather essential supplies. "It's not safe, but nowhere in Neo Viridian is safe for us now." They packed quickly: food, water purification tablets, medical supplies, a portable solar charger, and a few tools Elias couldn't bear to leave behind. Lyra changed into the most inconspicuous clothes they had: a hooded jacket that concealed her distinctive features, gloves to hide her luminescent skin, and dark glasses for her amber eyes. As a final precaution, Elias rigged a simple timer to several devices in the workshop, set to activate hours after their departure. The power surge would trigger alarms, but by then, they would be far away. It might buy them a few extra hours of confusion. They left through the back exit, slipping into the narrow alley as the perpetual acid rain fell in a fine mist around them. Elias held their single acid-resistant umbrella over Lyra, his own skin burning slightly from the exposure. The discomfort was nothing compared to the fear driving them forward. The journey to the dead zone required navigating the underbelly of Neo Viridian, service tunnels, abandoned subway lines, and the dangerous territories controlled by those who existed entirely outside the corporate system. Elias had only heard rumors of these routes, but had never had reason to seek them out until now. Their first obstacle came at a checkpoint between districts where automated scanners verified citizen IDs for passage. Lyra had no ID, and Elias's would trigger an alert now that he was likely flagged in the system. They waited in the shadows of a loading dock, watching the checkpoint for patterns in the security coverage. "There," Elias whispered, pointing to a maintenance hatch beneath the elevated roadway. "Those lead to the service tunnels for the water reclamation system. If we can get through there, we can bypass the checkpoint." "Guards?" Lyra asked, scanning the area with eyes better adapted to the darkness than his. "Automated mostly. Drones and fixed cameras. The human patrols come by every 20 minutes or so." They timed their approach carefully, darting across the open space during a patrol gap. The hatch was locked with a standard corporate cipher, but Elias had encountered enough of them in his repair work to know the override sequences. His fingers danced across the keypad, and after 3 tense attempts, the lock disengaged with a soft click. The tunnel beyond was dark and claustrophobic, barely tall enough for Elias to stand upright. The air was heavy with moisture and the acrid smell of chemical treatments. They moved as quickly as they dared, guided by the soft glow Lyra allowed to emanate from her hands, just enough to illuminate their immediate path. After what seemed like hours of navigating the labyrinthine tunnels, they emerged in what had once been a transit station, now abandoned and partially collapsed. The platform opened onto a vista of devastation: crumbling factory buildings, twisted metal structures, and the skeletal remains of worker housing units. The dead zone. Even the rain seemed different here, thicker, almost gelatinous, carrying a sickly green tint from the chemicals still leaching from the contaminated ground. Their umbrella offered minimal protection, so they hurried toward the nearest intact structure, a former administrative building that stood somewhat higher than the surrounding ruins. Inside, the air was stale but less toxic than outside. They found a room on the upper floor with intact windows, offering a view of the approach while providing shelter. Elias set up their meager supplies while Lyra secured the entrances as best she could. When they had done all they could, exhaustion overtook them. They sat side by side against the wall, shoulders touching, sharing the comfort of proximity in this desolate place. "I am sorry," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. "Bring danger to you." Elias shook his head. "You have nothing to be sorry for. If anything, I should apologize for the way my world has treated you. Not your fault. Not all humans same. You show me this." She hesitated, then added, "Component they took. It was beginning to respond. I felt it the day before. Weak signal, but real." Elias looked at her sharply. "A signal? From your people?" She nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and resignation. Very distant, but they search still. Now corporate has component, maybe they find signal too. The implications hung heavily between them. If Lyra's people were indeed searching for her, and if the corporations intercepted that communication, it could lead to consequences neither of them could predict. Would Lyra's people come in peace, or would they respond with hostility to the theft of their technology and the treatment of their crew member? Would the corporations attempt peaceful contact or prepare for conflict? For now, such concerns were secondary to their immediate survival. They needed rest if they were to have any hope of evading the search that would surely intensify by morning. They took turns keeping watch through the night, though sleep came fitfully to both. The distant sounds of the city, industrial drones, the occasional security siren, the constant patter of toxic rain, created an uneasy soundtrack to their vigil. Dawn broke with a sickly greenish light filtering through the perpetual smog. Elias, who had taken a last watch, gently woke Lyra. They shared a meager breakfast of nutrient bars and purified water, neither speaking much as they contemplated their next move. Their planning was interrupted by a distant but distinctive sound, the whirring of drone rotors, multiple units moving in formation. Elias rushed to the window, careful to stay hidden from view. In the distance, he could see them, at least a dozen security drones, their sleek black bodies reflecting the meager light as they systematically swept the dead zone. "They've found us," he said grimly. "Or at least, they've guessed where we might go." Lyra joined him at the window, her face set in determination. "We keep moving. We have to. But we need a destination, not just endless running." Elias ran a hand through his disheveled hair, thinking furiously. The old subway tunnels extend beneath the dead zone, connecting to what used to be called the Undercity. There are people there, outcasts, corporate fugitives, people who've chosen to live off the grid entirely. They might help us, or at least not turn us in immediately. It was a desperate plan, but their options were rapidly dwindling. They gathered their supplies and prepared to leave the temporary sanctuary, mapping out a route that would keep them away from the approaching drones as long as possible. As they made their way through the ruins, ducking from one building to another, the search intensified around them. Twice they had to freeze in place as drones passed directly overhead, their sensors sweeping the area with invisible beams that Lyra could somehow perceive, guiding them to safety with gentle tugs on Elias's sleeve. The entrance to the old subway system was hidden beneath the collapsed remains of what had once been a transportation hub. Years of neglect and chemical erosion had rendered the official entrances impassable, but Elias had heard rumors of maintenance access points that might still be navigable. After nearly an hour of searching, they found what they were looking for, a narrow utility shaft partially concealed by fallen debris. The metal ladder, descending into darkness, was corroded, but seemed structurally sound enough to bear their weight. "I'll go first," Elias said, testing the rungs carefully before committing his full weight. "Follow exactly where I step." The descent was nerve-wracking, each corroded rung threatening to give way under their feet. About halfway down, one broke under Elias's weight, sending him sliding several feet before he managed to catch himself. His hand was scraped raw, but he continued downward, aware that turning back was no longer an option. When they finally reached the bottom, they found themselves in a service tunnel that ran parallel to the main subway lines. Emergency lights, powered by ancient but seemingly inexhaustible nuclear batteries, cast a faint blue glow across the dusty concrete. The air was stale but breathable, free from the toxic chemicals that permeated the world above. "This way," Elias whispered, though they hadn't seen any signs of surveillance this deep. The main tunnels should connect to the Undercity about 2 kilometers east. They moved as quickly as they dared through the labyrinthine passageways, guided by faded maintenance signs and Elias's imperfect memory of urban legends about the subterranean network. The tunnels occasionally opened into larger spaces, abandoned platforms and station concourses frozen in time, advertisements for products long discontinued still visible on the walls, promising a brighter future that never came. After what seemed like hours of walking, they began to notice subtle changes in their surroundings. The neglected corporate infrastructure gave way to improvised repairs and modifications. Handmade signs appeared on the walls, directional markers in a crude code that Elias only partially understood. Most telling were the small, carefully hidden cameras, not the sleek, corporate models, but jury-rigged devices cobbled together from salvage parts. "We're being watched," Elias murmured to Lyra. "Not by the corporations, by whoever lives down here." "Friendly?" she asked, her hand instinctively seeking his in the dim light. "I don't know," he admitted, giving her fingers a reassuring squeeze. "But they haven't triggered any alarms yet, which is a good sign." They continued forward, now certain that their progress was being monitored. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber that had once been a central station hub. Unlike the abandoned areas they had passed through, this space hummed with life. Makeshift dwellings constructed from salvaged materials lined the walls, and jury-rigged lighting cast a warm glow throughout the cavern. Most surprising was the people, dozens of them, going about their lives in this underground community. Some tended hydroponic gardens that grew under specialized lights. Others worked at repair stations or traded goods at improvised market stalls. Children, actual children, a rare sight in Neo-Viridian's outer districts, played in a designated area, their laughter echoing strangely in the subterranean space. As Elias and Lyra stood at the entrance, uncertain of their welcome, a group of 5 individuals approached them. They carried no visible weapons, but moved with the cautious confidence of those prepared to defend their territory. Their leader was a tall woman with dark skin and intricate cybernetic augmentations visible along her temples and neck, black market enhancements, not the sleek corporate versions. Her eyes held the hardness of someone who had survived much, but also a shrewd intelligence. "Top side ears," she stated, her voice neither welcoming nor hostile. "You're a long way from the surface. Corporate refugees, or just lost?" Elias stepped forward slightly, keeping Lyra partially behind him. "Refugees," he answered. "Honestly, corporate security is searching for us. We need somewhere to hide, just for a little while." The woman's cybernetic eyes whirred almost imperceptibly as she assessed them. "I'm Zora. I speak for the Eastern Undercity Coalition. We don't usually welcome strangers, but we also share a common enemy in the corporations." Her gaze shifted to Lyra, whose hood had slipped back slightly, revealing her unusual features. "Your friend isn't human." It wasn't a question, and Elias saw no point in denying it. "Her name is Lyra. She's a visitor who crashed here accidentally. The corporations want to capture her for experimentation. I couldn't let that happen." A murmur ran through the group behind Zora. One of them, an older man with a mechanical prosthetic arm, stepped forward. "Do you have any idea what you've brought to our doorstep? If corporate security is hunting an alien, they'll tear apart the entire Undercity to find her." "We didn't know where else to go," Elias said, desperation edging into his voice. "We just need shelter until we can figure out our next move." "Please." Zora raised a hand, silencing her companion's objections. "The consortium has protocols for situations like this." She turned to Lyra directly. "Can you speak for yourself?" Lyra stepped forward, lowering her hood completely. In the artificial light of the Undercity, her metallic skin and amber eyes were even more striking. Several people gasped, and a few made warding gestures from various cultural traditions. "I am Lyra," she said, her musical accent lilting through the human language. "My ship crashed, separated from my people. Elias helped when no one would. Now I want to bring danger to you. Just need safe place, short time." Zora studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "You'll stay in quarantine quarters until the council can meet and decide your fate. That's the best I can offer." "Thank you," Elias said sincerely. "We won't forget this." "See that you don't," Zora replied. "And understand this. If your presence threatens our community, we will not hesitate to ask you to leave, regardless of what awaits you on the surface." They were escorted to a small chamber that had once been a station security office, now converted into a sparse but clean living space. A single guard was posted outside, though whether to protect them or to protect the community from them remained unclear. Once alone, Elias sank onto one of the narrow beds, the adrenaline of their escape finally giving way to exhaustion. "We made it," he said quietly. For now, Lyra sat beside him, her shoulder touching his in what had become a familiar gesture of comfort between them. "These people, like you, helping despite danger. Not all of them want to help," Elias reminded her. "And they're right to be cautious. We've brought a lot of trouble with us." "The component," Lyra said suddenly, her expression troubled. "If corporations study it, might track signal from my people. Led them here." The thought had occurred to Elias as well. If Lyra's crew was indeed searching for her, and if the fragment they'd stolen could receive or transmit signals, it was only a matter of time before multiple parties converged on Neo-Viridian. Corporate security, Lyra's people, and possibly other interested factions who would have picked up on the unusual activity. "We need to get it back," Elias said, the idea forming even as he spoke it. "Not just to contact your people, but to prevent the corporations from using it to find us or intercept your crew." Lyra looked at him with surprise. "Go back? To city? Too dangerous." "Extremely dangerous," he agreed. "But less dangerous than waiting for them to decode alien technology and use it against us. Besides, these people won't let us stay here forever. We need a more permanent solution." Before they could discuss further, the door opened, and Zora entered with another woman, shorter, older, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that spoke of decades of hard-earned wisdom. "This is Dr. Valencia," Zora introduced her companion. "She's our chief medical officer and xenobiologist." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You have a xenobiologist in the Undercity?" Dr. Valencia's laugh was dry but not unkind. "I was a senior researcher at NeoCorp's Exobiology Division before I retired unexpectedly. Let's just say my ethical concerns about certain corporate experiments made me unpopular with management." She approached Lyra with professional interest rather than fear or suspicion. "May I?" Lyra nodded her consent, and Dr. Valencia began a respectful but thorough examination, asking questions about Lyra's physiology, dietary needs, and the properties of her bioluminescent skin patterns. Throughout the examination, she maintained a demeanor of scientific curiosity tempered with humanitarian concern. "Fascinating," she murmured as she observed the patterns that emerged when Lyra activated her. "Bioluminescence. A biological interface with technology. We've been trying to develop something similar for decades, but we've never achieved this level of integration." She looked at Lyra with genuine respect. "Your people must be thousands of years ahead of us technologically." "Different path, not just ahead," Lyra corrected gently. "We grow technology, not just build. Work with nature, not against." Dr. Valencia nodded thoughtfully. "A philosophy we would do well to learn from." She turned to Zora. "She's not a biological threat to our community. Her cellular structure is fundamentally different from ours, but not in a way that carries pathogens dangerous to humans. I recommend lifting the quarantine restriction." Zora considered this, then nodded. "Accepted. You'll still be escorted when moving through the community, but you're free to leave these quarters under supervision." She fixed them with a stern look. "The council meets tomorrow. Be prepared to state your case more fully then." After they left, Elias and Lyra were brought food, simple but nutritious meals prepared from the Undercity's hydroponic gardens. The vegetables were small but vibrant, grown without the chemical supplements that characterize surface agriculture. As they ate, Elias couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Lyra since they'd met. She had always been resilient, but now there was a new confidence in her movements, a better understanding of her surroundings. She was adapting to Earth, to human society, or at least to this hidden corner of it. "What will you do," he asked carefully, "if we do manage to contact your people? When they come for you?" Lyra paused, setting down her utensil. The question that had been hovering unspoken between them for days was finally in the open. She began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with conflicting emotions. "My duty is return. Report findings. Complete mission." She looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the dim light. "But never before had reason to stay on Study Planet." The implication sent a rush of warmth through Elias. "There's nothing for you here," he said softly, feeling he needed to give her the freedom to choose without guilt. Neo-Viridian is a dying city on a troubled planet. Your world sounds so much more advanced, more peaceful. Advanced, yes. Peaceful, mostly. Lyra reached across the small table between them, her fingers finding his. But no Elias there. The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to fully articulate. Before Elias could respond, a commotion outside their quarters drew their attention. The door burst open, and a breathless messenger rushed in. "Zora needs you both immediately. Corporate security drones have been detected entering the eastern tunnels. They're searching systematically, using some kind of new tracking technology. The council thinks they're following you." Elias and Lyra exchanged alarmed looks. "The component," Lyra whispered. "They must have activated it, using it to follow our path." They hurried after the messenger through the Undercity, which was now in a state of controlled chaos. People were methodically packing essential supplies, children were being gathered into protected groups, and defense teams were taking up positions at key tunnel junctions. Zora awaited them in what appeared to be a command center, a repurposed station master's office filled with salvaged monitoring equipment. Displays showed thermal imagery of the tunnels, with a cluster of red signatures moving steadily closer to their location. "You brought them straight to us," she said, anger and resignation mixing in her voice. "These aren't standard patrols. They're moving with purpose directly toward our location. It's the component they took from us," Elias explained quickly. "It's part of Lyra's ship's communication array. They must have figured out how to activate it, and now they're using it to track the energy signature that resonates with her biology." Dr. Valencia, who was also present, looked sharply at Lyra. "Your bioluminescence, it's not just for show, is it? It's a biological transmitter, constantly sending out low-level signals that would be undetectable to our technology, but recognizable to yours." Lyra nodded grimly. "Cannot fully turn off. Part of who I am." "Then you need to leave," Zora said firmly. "Not just our community. You need to get as far away from populated areas as possible. If they can track you, nowhere in the Undercity will be safe." "We'll go," Elias agreed. "But we need a destination, and we need to get that component back. As long as they have it, they can find Lyra anywhere on Earth." One of Zora's lieutenants, a man with extensive facial scarring, spoke up. "The old research outpost in Sector 7 might work. It's in the most toxic part of the dead zone. Even corporate security avoids it. The lead line walls were designed to contain radiation experiments. They might block the tracking signal temporarily." "And the component?" Elias pressed. Zora exchanged looks with her advisors. "Given the circumstances, retrieving it aligns with our interests as well. The Undercity cannot afford a full corporate incursion." She turned to a map displayed on a cracked but functional screen. "Based on the drone movements, we believe they're operating from this security outpost on the eastern perimeter of the dead zone. It's a temporary forward base, minimally staffed but heavily automated." "I worked in corporate security before joining the Undercity," the Scar Man offered. "That model of outpost typically houses sensitive materials in a central secure room. If your component is there, that's where they'd keep it." A daring plan began to form in Elias's mind. If we could create a diversion, draw their attention and resources away from the outpost, a small team might be able to infiltrate and retrieve the component. "You're talking about a direct action against corporate security," Zora said, her tone making it clear how dangerous she considered this idea. "Something we've avoided for decades, because it would bring their full might down upon us." "They're already coming," Elias pointed out. "And once they confirm the existence of an alien presence, they'll never stop searching. This might be our only chance to end this." After a tense debate among the Undercity leadership, a compromise was reached. They would help Elias and Lyra reach the research outpost in Sector 7, providing guides and supplies. From there, a small volunteer team would assist in the retrieval operation, but the Undercity as a whole would maintain plausible deniability. As preparations were made, Elias found himself drawn to a wall where photographs and small mementos were displayed, a memorial of sorts. Names and dates were written beside each item, many accompanied by the simple phrase, "lost to the core." "Our remembrance wall," said a quiet voice behind him. Dr. Valencia had approached without him noticing. "Everyone here has lost someone to corporate greed. Family members worked to death in the factories, friends who disappeared into voluntary research programs, children taken for their special aptitudes." Elias's eyes were drawn to a faded photograph of a young woman with Valencia's eyes. "Your daughter?" "My niece," she corrected softly. She showed early signs of empathic abilities, a genetic mutation becoming more common as our species adapts to the stress of our environment. The corporation took her for specialized education. We never saw her again. The doctor's gaze shifted to Lyra, who was across the room, helping to pack medical supplies. "When I first saw your friend, I was in awe, not just of her biology, but of what she represents, proof that intelligence can evolve along different paths, that there are worlds beyond our corporate prison. If the corporations get hold of her and her technology." "They never will," Elias said with quiet determination. "I'll die before I let that happen." Valencia studied him with knowing eyes. "You love her." It wasn't a question, and Elias didn't deny it. "Is that so strange? In a world that fears anything different?" "Yes." Valencia smiled sadly. "But also beautiful, perhaps even necessary." Their conversation was interrupted as final preparations were completed. The escape team, Elias, Lyra, and 3 Undercity volunteers familiar with the dead zone's hidden paths, gathered at the eastern exit tunnel. Zora approached them with a final brief. "Corporate drones have established a search pattern that will reach our main hub within 2 hours. We're implementing evacuation protocols, dispersing our people to secondary locations. You need to move fast and stay ahead of the search grid." She handed Elias a makeshift map. "The research outpost is marked. It's an 8-hour journey through difficult terrain." She turned to Lyra. "Dr. Valencia prepared these for you." She handed over what looked like thin, metallic gloves. "They won't completely block your biosignals, but they should dampen them enough to buy you some time." Lyra accepted the gloves gratefully, slipping them over her hands. The luminescent patterns on her skin dimmed visibly beneath the material. "Thank you," she said, her musical voice carrying genuine emotion. "Your people risk much for strangers." Zora's hard expression softened slightly. "Perhaps we recognize something of ourselves in you both. Those who don't fit in the world they were given and must make their own path." With final preparations complete, they set out through a maintenance tunnel that would lead them deeper into the dead zone than they had ventured before. The journey would be perilous, but the alternative, capture by corporate security, was unthinkable. The tunnels eventually gave way to a network of half-collapsed sewer systems and abandoned utility corridors. The air grew, increasingly toxic, forcing them to don filtration masks provided by the Undercity. Even through the filters, the caustic atmosphere burned their throats and made their eyes water. Their guides, siblings named Kai and Lena, who had grown up in the Undercity, and an older man called Morse, who had once been a corporate cartographer, moved with practiced efficiency through the hazardous landscape. They knew which areas to avoid, where the ground might give way to chemical sinkholes, which ruins still harbored functioning security systems. Hours into their journey, as they picked their way through the skeletal remains of what had once been a residential district, Lyra suddenly froze. Her head tilted as if listening to something beyond human perception. "What is it?" Elias asked, instantly alert. "Signal," she whispered, removing one glove and allowing her skin to glow faintly. The patterns shifted in a way Elias had never seen before, forming complex, rapidly changing configurations. "From my people. Strong now. Very close." Morse checked a radiation detector strapped to his wrist. "We're still 5 kilometers from the research outpost. Could your people have tracked you here already?" Lyra shook her head, her expression a mixture of hope and confusion. "Not possible. Signal pattern wrong for rescue. This is," she struggled to find words, "automated. Emergency beacon. From ship. Your ship crashed near here?" Elias asked, surprised. The implications were significant. If part of Lyra's vessel was intact, it might contain technology they could use to block the tracking or even to communicate directly with her people. Not main ship, Lyra clarified. Escape pod. When separation happened, entered emergency protocol. I was unconscious after landing. Never found pod. Kai and Lena exchanged glances. Changing the plan is risky, Kai said cautiously. The outpost was secure, known. But if her ship has technology that could help us, it might be worth the detour, Lena countered. Especially if corporate security hasn't found it yet. After a brief debate, they decided to follow the signal. Lyra led the way, her partially unloved hand extended before her like a compass, the patterns shifting more rapidly as they apparently drew closer to the source. They diverted from their planned route, heading northwest through increasingly unstable ruins. The signal led them to a massive chemical disposal facility, a towering, corroded structure surrounded by collection pools filled with substances too toxic for even Neo-Viridian's lax environmental standards. Warning signs in faded red indicated radiation and biohazard dangers, many listing chemicals with half-lives measured in centuries. The signal comes from inside, Lyra said, pointing to a partially collapsed section of the facility. That's a Class 5 toxic site, Morse warned. Even with our filters, we shouldn't stay more than 30 minutes. The radiation alone will cause damage with prolonged exposure. Elias looked at Lyra, understanding passing between them without words. We have to try. You three can wait here if you prefer. Kai shook his head. We stick together, but we move fast, get what we need, and get out. They entered through a breach in the outer wall, finding themselves in what had once been a processing center. Massive tanks, now cracked and leaking, lined the walls. The floor was slick with substances that ate through the soles of their boots on contact. The air, even through the filters, tasted of metal and decay. Lyra moved with increasing urgency, following the signal through the hazardous maze. Close now. Very close. They descended a partially collapsed stairwell into a lower level where the destruction was less severe. Here, the facility seemed to have been repurposed at some point. Newer equipment, now also abandoned, had been installed alongside the original machinery. This section was converted to a research lab. Morse observed, examining markings on the walls. Corporate logo is old style, probably from before the reorganization 20 years ago. At the end of a long corridor, they found a sealed door that had been breached, not by the facility's deterioration, but by something that had smashed through it from the outside. The edges of the breach were smooth, almost melted. Beyond the door lay what had indeed been a research lab, but it was now centered around an object that clearly didn't belong. A sleek, egg-shaped pod approximately 3 meters long, its metallic surface covered in designs similar to the patterns on Lyra's skin. Despite having crashed through the wall, the pod appeared largely intact, though a jagged crack ran along one side. Lyra made a sound of recognition, moving toward it with reverence and urgency. As she approached, the patterns on the pod responded, lighting up in sequences that matched those on her skin. A section of the hull reconfigured itself, opening to reveal an access point. Functioning, she said with obvious relief. Basic systems only, but functioning. She placed her hand on a specific pattern, and the pod's interior illuminated. Strange displays appeared, projected into the air above the craft, showing diagrams and symbols incomprehensible to the humans present. Can retrieve emergency supplies, Lyra explained as she interacted with the system. Medical, communication, survival. While Lyra worked with the pod systems, Elias examined the surrounding lab. It showed signs of having been hastily abandoned, papers still on desks, equipment left running until power had failed. Something had caused the researchers to flee in a hurry. Elias, look at this, Morse called, pointing to a faded security terminal. According to this log, this facility was evacuated after an unidentified aerial phenomenon struck the building. Corporate security classified the entire incident and sealed the records. They knew, Elias realized. They knew something had crashed here, but couldn't find it among all the toxic waste. The radiation and chemicals probably masked its signature from their scanners. Lyra emerged from the pod, carrying a small device similar to the component that had been stolen but intact. "Communication array," she said. "Can call my people directly now." Also, she held up what looked like a cylindrical container, medical technology. "Will help with radiation exposure." The timing was fortunate, as Morse's radiation detector was now emitting a quiet but insistent warning beep. "We've been here 20 minutes. We need to move." As they prepared to leave, a distant but unmistakable sound reached them, the whirring of drone rotors, multiple units approaching the facility. "They followed our trail," Kai said grimly. "The corporate outpost must have detected our movement. Or they detected the pod activating," Lena suggested. "Either way, we're trapped if we don't move now." They hurried back through the toxic labyrinth, Lyra clutching the retrieved technology. The drones were drawing closer, their searchlights visible through breaches in the facility structure. Just as they reached the exit point, a spotlight caught them, and an automated voice boomed through external speakers. "Unauthorized personnel in restricted area. Remain where you are. Corporate security is en route. Run," Elias shouted, pulling Lyra toward the cover of a nearby chemical tank. Their guides split up, creating multiple targets and confusion for the drone's tracking systems. What followed was a desperate chase through the toxic wasteland. The drones, unable to deploy their usual incapacitating measures in the hazardous environment, maintained visual contact while waiting for human security forces to arrive. Elias and Lyra used this limitation to their advantage, diving through areas where caustic fumes temporarily obscured visibility. They lost track of their guides in the chaos, but continued moving according to the plan, heading toward the research outpost in Sector 7. The journey, already dangerous, became a nightmare of close calls and narrow escapes as additional drones joined the search. After hours of evasion, their filters beginning to fail and exhaustion setting in, they finally spotted the research outpost, a low, bunker-like structure partially buried in contaminated soil. Its reinforced walls and lead shielding had indeed protected it from the worst of the surrounding toxicity. They made a final dash across open ground, the whir of drones closing in behind them. At the bunker's entrance, they found Morse waiting for them, though there was no sign of Kai and Lena. "Hurry," he urged, entering a code into the ancient security panel. The heavy door slid open with a reluctant groan. "The siblings are creating a diversion on the eastern perimeter. They'll join us if they can." Once inside, Morse sealed the door, engaging additional security protocols that had somehow survived decades of abandonment. The interior of the bunker was Spartan but intact. Emergency lighting activated as they entered, illuminating a facility that had been designed for long-term scientific isolation. "Radiation levels are lower here," Morse confirmed, checking his detector. "We should be safe for now, and the shielding should block most tracking signals." Lyra immediately set to work with the communication array she had retrieved from the escape pod, connecting it to power sources in the bunker and making adjustments that neither Elias nor Morse could follow. Her fingers moved with precision over the device, the patterns on her skin responding to its activation. "Can reach my people now," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "But signal takes time to travel. And," she hesitated, looking at Elias, "once sent, cannot stop what follows." The implication was clear. Sending the signal would bring Lyra's people to Earth, setting in motion events that none of them could predict or control. It was also their best hope for survival. "Do it," Elias said firmly. "Whatever happens, it's better than letting the corporations capture you or your technology." Lyra nodded and completed the final adjustments. The device hummed to life, emitting a soft, pulsating glow as it sent its message into the depths of space. How long it would take to reach her people, none of them could say. With the immediate task completed, they turned their attention to securing their temporary refuge and treating their injuries. The medical technology Lyra had retrieved proved invaluable, neutralizing the radiation damage they had all sustained and healing Elias's chemical burns with remarkable speed. As night fell over the dead zone, They gathered in what had once been the outpost's communal area. Through reinforced observation windows, they could see the corporate security drones still searching, their lights sweeping methodically across the toxic landscape. They're not giving up, Morse observed grimly. And they're bringing in ground teams in hazard suits. The lead shielding will hide us for a while, but eventually they'll conduct a building-by-building search. We still need to recover the stolen component, Elias reminded them. As long as they have it, they might be able to intercept or interfere with Lyra's signal. Morse unfurled a rough map of the area. The corporate outpost is located here, about 3 kilometers southeast. Security will be heightened now that they know we're in the area, but they'll also be spread thin with search teams deployed. They began formulating a plan, a high-risk infiltration of the corporate outpost to retrieve the component, while most of their forces were engaged in the wider search. Morse, with his knowledge of corporate protocols, would be invaluable for bypassing security systems. As they worked, Lyra suddenly tensed, her head tilting in that now-familiar listening posture. "Signal," she said, her voice hushed with wonder. "Receiving reply already." "That's impossible," Elias said. "Even at light speed, your signal couldn't have reached your people yet, let alone allowed them to send a response." "Not from my people," Lyra clarified, her amber eyes wide. "From others. Others of my kind, already here, hidden on your world." The revelation stunned them into silence. If there were other Lemurians already on Earth, it changed everything. Their plans, their chances, the very nature of the situation they found themselves in. "How many?" Elias finally asked. "Where?" "Small group. Scientific observation post. Hidden in mountains far north of city." Lyra's expression was a mixture of joy and confusion. They say they have been watching Earth for many cycles. Not meant to interact, only observe. My crash change protocol. An alien observation post has been monitoring Earth. Morse whispered, the implications clearly overwhelming him. "For how long?" "Many of your years," Lyra replied. "They're coming now, to help, but will take time to reach us safely, avoid detection." The news brought both hope and new complications. Help was coming, but not immediately. They still needed to survive, to retrieve the stolen component, and to evade capture until Lyra's people could reach them. As they absorbed this information, a soft alarm from one of the bunker's monitoring systems drew their attention. Security cameras positioned around the perimeter showed a group approaching, 2 figures supporting a third between them. "It's Kai and Lena," Moore said with relief, recognizing the siblings. "They made it, but someone's with them, injured from the look of it." Elias rushed to the entrance, helping Morse disengage the security locks. The door slid open to reveal the siblings, exhausted and battered, half carrying a woman in a torn corporate security uniform. Blood seeped from a wound in her side, and her face was pale with shock and pain. "Found her abandoned by her team when the toxic levels got too high for their equipment," Kai explained as they brought her inside. Her mask was failing. "Couldn't leave her to die, corporate or not." The woman was semi-conscious, her breathing labored. As Lyra approached with a medical device, the security officer's eyes widened in recognition and fear. "You're the alien entity," she gasped. "The one we're hunting." "Yes," Lyra acknowledged, kneeling beside her. "Now be still. We'll help heal you." Despite the woman's weak protests, Lyra applied the medical technology to her wound. The effect was immediate. The bleeding stopped, and color began to return to her face. The security officer stared in disbelief as her pain visibly receded. "Why?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. "Why help me?" "Because hurt is hurt," Lyra replied simply. "Does not matter who. If can help, should help." The woman fell silent, watching as Lyra completed the treatment. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier but troubled. "My name is Officer Diaz. I've been leading the search operation for you." Elias recognized her immediately, the same security officer who had questioned him at his workshop days earlier. "You're a long way from district security now," he noted. "This operation was elevated to corporate central command when we confirmed the alien technology signature," she explained, sitting up carefully. They're bringing in everything they have: military-grade drones, genetic trackers, even prototype weapon systems. They're not just trying to capture her anymore. They're treating this as a potential invasion scenario. Morse laughed bitterly. One stranded explorer, and they're preparing for war. Typical corporate paranoia. It's more than that, Diaz insisted. The component you left behind, our scientists activated it fully yesterday. It contained data, star charts, biological profiles of dozens of species, technological schematics beyond anything we've developed. The corporations aren't just afraid of one alien. They're afraid of what's coming. Lyra's expression grew troubled. The component contains our exploration database. Not meant for cultures not ready for contact. Your corporations misunderstand its purpose. That's putting it mildly, Diaz agreed. They see it as a threat assessment database.